Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 14 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-4 in the shootout. This marks 3 straight shootout losses in a row, and that's not to say the last 3 times that the Sharks have gone into the shootout they've lost, but this game, their previous game, and the game before that have all gone to shootout, and the Sharks have lost each and every one of them. I don't know if that's close to a record, or if there's some sort of record that has been tracked of the amount of shootout losses in a row, like one after the other, but this has been a pretty record-setting season for the San Jose Sharks for some good reasons. You know, Erik Karlsson really having a historic start to this year, and then also some bad ones with how they started the season with 4 or 5 straight losses, the fact that they didn't have a third period goal through the first 7 games of the year. So definitely a lot of records, and this may be getting close, or maybe even be another one. It was just a few days ago where the Sharks faced off in their first game of the season against the Anaheim Ducks, and that was a game that was extremely back and forth for kind of bad reasons. Both teams showed why they found themselves near the bottom of the standings. It was just horribly played, tons and tons of mistakes being made on either side, and in the end, the Ducks came out on top in that shootout 6-5. So here tonight, the Sharks seemed to come out with the idea that they were going to play better than the Anaheim Ducks. They said, you know what, we're better than this. We're better than this Anaheim squad that finds himself near the bottom of the standings, and play-wise, they did exactly that. The problem is that by the end of the day, the Sharks still lost in the exact same fashion. They outplayed the Ducks significantly here tonight, and yet they leave with only 1 point, and the Ducks will leave with 2. This one starts off in the first period, and the Sharks just absolutely dominate the first period. Like, it's not even close. They're getting up to like the 20-shot mark. Meanwhile, the Ducks are at like 2 or 3, and yet by the end of the first frame, the Sharks are actually trailing 2-1 in this game. At a point, the Ducks had 2 goals on 3 shots right near the end of the first period. And so while the Sharks would score the first goal of this game from LeBanc, it wouldn't last. However, in the second period, the strength of the Sharks would continue. It wouldn't be as dominant as the first, but it didn't need to be, considering the Sharks managed to outscore the Ducks 2-0 in that middle frame to turn a 2-1 deficit into a 3-2 lead. Then in the third period, things were going pretty well. The first half passes with not much doing, and eventually Tomas Hertl finally breaks through with his second of the season, his second goal, or his first goal since game 1 of the regular season, where he scored against the Nashville Predators in Prague, and the Sharks held a 4-2 lead, and it looked like that would be closing it out. The Sharks were just really significantly playing better than the Anaheim Ducks. They were up 2 goals. It seemed as though it was just done and done at that point, and then the Ducks get a penalty called against them with about 6 minutes to go, and you're thinking, okay, if the Sharks score here, it's pretty much over. Even if they don't, that's another 2 minutes off the clock. But as the penalty is expiring, an ill-advised pass to the point on the power play where Matt Nieto was sitting is missed by him. McTavish right out of the box gets the puck, gets the goal to bring the Ducks to within 1. But you know what? It's not over. The Sharks still have the 1-goal lead, but then it's Adam Henrique with the goaltender pulled who ties up this game. And even though this overtime was extremely exciting, there were multiple chances both ways. Reimer made some great saves in the overtime. You kind of felt like this one was going to shoot out just based on the last 2 games. And once again, in the shootout, the Sharks just cannot find any success at all. They get a goal from Kevin LeBanc finally, but they give up a couple and eventually lose it. Now, going on to the players to talk here, you know, every once in a while there are games that we get to where the Sharks play so horribly and get so outclassed by the team that they are against that it becomes very difficult to review actually how each and every player played, because I would essentially just be going through each and every one and saying, this guy didn't do well, this guy didn't do well, this guy didn't do well, and so it's not super productive. This game is essentially the exact opposite of that, where the Sharks played so well and ended up losing only because of the very few mistakes that they made that ended up in the back of their net, that it's difficult to actually go through that many of these players and say, well, this guy played well, this guy played well, this guy played well, because it was generally a very strong 60 minutes for the San Jose Sharks. They really did take it to the Anaheim Ducks, but they were making these mistakes here, and they didn't get bailed out by their goaltender tonight, and so they ended up losing losing it. But let's start off with the first line indeed. So I, of course, talked at length about this first line situation for the San Jose Sharks last game, talking about how Labanc didn't really work out onto that first line and how that wasn't really a surprise. Well, it turns out when you are against one of the worst teams in the league and you play well, you can actually look like a strong line. And a strong line it did. This was by far the best line for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. It was by far the best line in the game as a whole. This was the best game for this first line of the entire season, I would say. Pretty much every single time these three players stepped on the ice, a play was happening. They contributed multiple goals here tonight, 3 of them if I'm not mistaken. Meyer was on fire, Hertl was on fire, even Labanc was looking quite solid. This does begin to beg the questions, is Labanc some sort of long-term solution on this top line? The answer to that, I'm going to say, is no. He definitely isn't. Like I just mentioned earlier, this was a game against one of the worst teams in the league that we had already seen a few days ago go up against the Sharks and put up a pretty pitiful sort of play-wise performance, even though, again, the Sharks have lost to them now twice. So what does that say about San Jose? So once the Sharks actually get back to playing against, better teams, it's likely that Labanc is going to continue to show that he doesn't really belong, but at the very least, this does buy him, at least for his sake, another game in this position. On the second line, also a relatively impressive game, I would say. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm probably going to say that about many of the players here tonight. Both Couture and Barabanov, I thought, once again showcased some pretty solid chemistry between them. Didn't actually manage to score. There were a couple of bobbled pucks from these players that kind of prevented them from getting some shots. In particular, in the overtime, Couture missed multiple great opportunities on the shifts that he had in that 5-minute 3-on-3 period. And so that was some missed opportunities, but in the end, still a solid game for them. And when we get to the third line, finally the third line, after being together for a few games and never actually looking good here tonight, because the team as a whole just absolutely decimated the Ducks. They actually looked quite solid. Bonino didn't look as disastrous as normal. Nico Sturm was relatively solid. Luke Cunnin obviously did score a goal, which was surprising. I do want to expand a bit on this goal that Luke Cunnin did score. It's a pass from Tomas Hertl. Cunnin sort of directs this puck into the net with his skate, with his leg, something along those lines, but that's not the controversy. The controversy is the Sharks, whether or not they came in offside. You see, they entered the zone with the puck as Barabanov was going for a change, but he was inside of the zone, and it immediately reminded me of the 2019 playoffs between the Sharks and the Colorado Avalanche. I don't remember exactly the players involved, but I know it was a Game 7 goal scored by the Avalanche that I believe would have tied the game at 2, and it was something like Landeskog was going for a change but in the zone, and since he was still on the ice completely out of the play, the Avalanche got called back for offside. And so I thought that exact same thing was going to happen here, because Barabanov was not yet off the ice, and yet the referees actually called it a good goal. So that was somewhat surprising, and generally a decent game for Cunnin. And then when it comes to the fourth line, Lorentz, Lindblom, and Gadjevich steps into the lineup here for Noah Gregor, and he makes an impact, at least physically, ends up getting into it pretty significantly. There was a fight early on in the game against Nathan Beaulieu. And then there was a situation, I believe it was in the second period, where there was some really rough stuff with like Anthony Stolarz pushes down one of the Sharks players, Gadjevich responds and the whole thing. So maybe that was the reason why they wanted Gadjevich into the lineup here tonight. Otherwise, it was actually a solid game for the fourth line. Lorentz had a couple of decent chances. Gadjevich, as I mentioned, got into it a bit. So all in all, a solid game for the Sharks top 12. And on the defensive side of things, I've been talking so at length about Erik Karlsson being really the only offensive guy for the San Jose Sharks, and there's a very good reason for that, because he is the only offensive guy for the San Jose Sharks. But here tonight we can finally mention a couple of other defensemen, because this was such a strong performance from the Sharks even in this loss, that multiple defensemen really stepped up and looked quite solid. Radim Shemek definitely the one that stands out the most, and we saw in the overtime that David Quinn actually rewards him when Erik Karlsson finally steps off the ice. The one other defenseman to actually get an overtime shift was Radim Shemek. Interesting interestingly enough, we also saw a shift in the overtime without a single defenseman on the ice. I believe it was Couture, Sturm, and Barabanov, if I am not mistaken. But Shemek, the fact that he gets that 3-on-3 shift and it wasn't a horrible idea is definitely a testament to how well he played in this particular game. We also saw some decent plays from Mario Ferraro as well. So generally a solid game for the defensive core as a whole. But like I mentioned earlier, there were just those couple of mistakes here or there. The lost coverage by Meyer on that first Ducks goal, the mistake for the pass and then Nieto being unable to catch it on the Ducks' third goal, the goaltender pulled scramble in front of the net on the fourth goal. Generally just the Sharks played well, but the few mistakes burned them, which does bring me, of course, to the goaltender here tonight, James Reimer, who has been so good for the San Jose Sharks thus far this season. You could even say that without Reimer, do the Sharks even have 3 wins on the year? It's hard to say, and yet this was a pretty rough game for him, all things considered. The few chances that the Ducks got actually ended up going in. He had a chance on the McTavish goal, didn't make the save. He had a chance on the Comtois goal, didn't make the save, and so Reimer not necessarily playing super well. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action all the way on Thursday. This, I believe it was a 5-game homestand, now concludes. The San Jose Sharks lost 3 straight games in the shootout, so they still got points from the homestand, but not too many, and multiple losses racked up. And now they head on the road. They'll face off against the St. Louis Blues, who find themselves actually the one singular team behind the San Jose Sharks in the Western Conference standings. And we'll see sort of when a movable force meets a stoppable object, who wins. Class dismissed.